What's up, dudes and dudettes? My name's Scythe, and today we are going to be taking an in-depth look at all the Trove classes, because lots of people have been asking me what's the ideal gear for all the classes. Now granted, I am going to just point out that a lot of these classes I don't actually main, so I don't know if there is a better solution for some of them. But first and foremost, we're going to start with the general stats that you don't want on any class. So this includes stability, movement speed, jump. If you can sacrifice it, it's always better to get rid of it. Most of the dungeons nowadays don't have as much jump, and there's a lot of air gusts everywhere, so you don't really need to worry about it. But it's understandable if you're first starting out that you need a bit of jump. So you can get that one, but it's kind of iffy. Crit hit, never get that, because crit hit is your chance to cause critical damage. Now, that gets completely nulled when you end up getting the Sure Strike emblem, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. That's pretty much an essential to every build. You also, I just want to take this time to point out that Superstition, lots of people always are asking, like, what is Superstition? It's a joke stat. That's exactly what it's there for, is so people sit there questioning whether it actually does anything. So it's kind of funny. The things that you do want generally on every class is your basic attack. Now, the point that I'm saying, hello, random person. The only reason I'm pointing this out is because lots of people sometimes don't really know, like, certain classes, you need to watch out for whether they use physical or magical damage. So, like, the Shadow Hunter, even though it uses a bow, I'm pretty sure it actually counts as physical, doesn't it? Yeah, actually it does. That's right. So just stuff like that. Generally, the best way to find out what your class actually uses is just look at the weapon, and the first stat is always going to be physical or magical damage. The other thing too is you can go for attack speed depending on the class. Dracolyte and Boomeranger don't need it, but we'll get more into that detail in a bit. Crit damage, now that is a stat that you generally are going to want on absolutely every class, so watch out for that. Energy regen, it's kind of hit or miss. It depends on the class that you're actually using. In the situation with the Lunar Lancer, who's actually like the strongest for grinding dungeons and stuff, you're only gonna want energy regen on his spear. But again, we'll get into all of this in a moment. I'm just talking about general stats and stuff like that. Those all cover your attacks. Like, those are like more offensive skills, and even energy regen can be considered an offensive skill because it's going to give you the ability to cast more of your abilities. And then for defense in this game, there's not actually any raw defense stat. Instead, it's just your maximum health, your health percentage, which is just a second stat that goes towards your maximum health, and then health regen. And those are pretty much all of the stats that you're going to have to concern yourself with. And then last but not least, this is just mostly for people at the end game, is magic find. So without further ado, we're gonna talk about the knight now. I'm the knight. Y'all remember that? I sure do. It was a million years ago. Anyway, this is the knight. He's very beautiful. He's an awesome class, but unfortunately, I'm just gonna say this heads up right now, most of the older classes actually haven't gotten any love since their initial conception into the game. So the knight, for example, has barely received any buffs over time, making him less and less relevant, more and more useless, because you have to consider that U5 and U6 have been getting constant buffs as the game develops further and further, and because of that, the more recent classes are usually the strongest, while the older classes kind of fall on the sidelines. But the knight can still be kind of a contender just because he's fairly tanky, not nearly as tanky as the Revenant, but again, we'll get into that for a bit. So what you're gonna want for this guy's ideal stats is, of course, physical damage. Ignore the crit hit. That's just because I don't have a good ring with this guy. But you're probably gonna want to go for either maximum health or health regen, and just focusing on his damage and health regen. I don't have ideal gear for all my classes. I will point that out right now. As you can see right here, I do not have radiant gear for all my classes. This sword actually right here is a really good one, and it's got health regen and maximum health, so we're standing firm at about 54k. I haven't really tested this guy out in U6 that much because he's the knight. He's not really that good. But for your ally, you're going to definitely want to use the Raptor Berserker. For your Flask, I use Death Defying just because with him being an early class, he's kind of squishy. So if he ends up dying, the Death Defy will heal you out. And rule of thumb with every single class, you're always going to want to use at least one of the emblems that gives you either magical or physical damage. And then for the majority of them, Sure Strike is the second emblem you're going to need. Once you have these two, you're never going to really need anything else. And then the emblem or the Flask is pretty much just up to you. In some cases, you'll end up using the one that gives you more Flask charges once you kill enemies with physical damage. And then the other one is just or with critical damage, not physical. And then the other one, which is absolutely wonderful for some of the constant DPS classes, is to regen Flask upon just using your crits in general. Now, I am going to point out that as we're sitting here talking about the Knight, I'm going to take less and less time with some of the other classes and talking about them and stuff like that, because we're covering a lot of ground just by talking about this one thing. Now, that said, that's pretty much it for the Knight. I am the hot dog. That's the Gunslinger. So anyway, this is a Gunslinger in his beautiful hot dog pajamas. You remember this guy from a million years ago? Hello, little penguin, go away. So what you're gonna want to aim for this guy is, as he uses guns, he's gonna be using magical damage. I really wish, I just want to say that this game would combine physical and magical damage into one single stat. I think that that would be the real next step to take and would make the game a lot less complex than it needs to be. You know, like it should definitely be a little bit more simpler, but maybe they have different design choices with stuff. Now, again, you're gonna see Arcane Emblem. This is the magic emblem as opposed to the physical emblem that we were using on the Knight, and Sure Strike. But the Gunslinger is almost useless. I will say that. He's a very, very cool class. He's a lot of fun, but he's kind of useless because his best ability is the fact that so long as you're actually like hitting enemies and stuff, he can juggle himself in the air almost indefinitely. But unfortunately, at least at the moment that I'm still recording this and up until this point, the servers in Trove are extremely unstable, and because of this, this guy becomes almost useless because lag is a huge factor in registering whether or not you've actually hit an enemy and are going to continue the juggle. Because otherwise, if he would juggle properly, then he would be fantastic, just because he would be almost invincible except to ranged enemies. Now, one thing that I do want to discuss right here, or just kind of cover, is I really wish like almost all the ranged classes could actually end up becoming extremely useful in this game if their shots phased through enemies. Now, if you don't know what that means, it means you shoot at an enemy and your bullet actually will go through that enemy and hit another enemy. Because as it stands right now, all the ranged classes, like guys like this that have single shot, unfortunately can only fight one enemy at a time. So pretty much every physical enemy or physical class ends up having like a basic AoE on their attack, thus making most of these ranged classes useless as far as like hardcore hunting and stuff like that. Now, again, what you're gonna want to aim for this guy, ignore that movement speed, that's a terrible helmet, is you can go for attack speed, which would be very, very good, because I'm sure that that combined with his ultimate, which actually just makes him shoot faster, would make this guy, he'd be pretty tough, honestly. And then in that case, you could actually swap off of the Death Defying and just go for the has a chance to recover one charge when you deal a critical hit, the Valorous Vial. That one would actually probably be really good if I had ideal Radiant gear with this guy. That is to say, attack speed. That would be great. And of course, for the ally, you're gonna end up wanting to use the more recent Prefect Penguin, because this is pretty much the opposite of the pretty much the opposite of the Raptor Berserker, where he does the exact same thing. Gain 15% health and movement speed boost when a nearby enemy dies. That is just a chance. It doesn't happen all the time. And then, of course, just the 20 magic damage itself, because the only other ally that you're going to end up using for a mage, or at least for magical damage, would be the Chloromancer Cubesley, which you don't really need on this guy because Chloromancer Cubesley ends up giving you cooldown, but we'll talk about that on the next guy. They call me No Face, or Tyrael from Diablo 3, except we're not actually rocking our hood. This is one of my favorite costumes for the Fae Trickster. Anyways, Now we are on the Trickster, and as you can see, I don't have any gear on this guy just because I don't. But this guy actually, for a long-range character, is one of the stronger, like, of all the other classes. He definitely is one of the strongest DPS, at least for a single target ranged character. I could probably actually take my gear off the Chloromancer just to kind of show you an example, but I'm just going to kind of skim over the fact that what you're going to be aiming for this guy is attack speed, because as much as he's got the glitter bomb, which is actually really good, and his ultimate, which that's the reason that we're using the Chloromancer Cubesly, is because it gives you a 25% cooldown time, reduces cooldown time by 25%, so you can actually use your ultimate a little bit more often. But anyway, the point being that this guy, actually his strongest attacks is just by using his single fire attack over and over. Glitter bomb is actually really good for clearing out like hordes of enemies, but if you're gonna be going for the ideal build, you're just gonna be wanting to focus on his basic attack, because of course it's all just about going into dungeons and clearing out the bosses as fast as possible, right? So that's kind of the rule of thumb with this guy, is to just focus on that. Of course, Sure Strike, again, using the arcane emblem, and I'm just using the vampiric vial because I find that this guy kills enemies so fast that it actually just becomes like very useful. I don't actually play with combat numbers on, but that's actually another way I do want to point out. It's a very good way of determining whether or not your build is actually like really good, because you can actually calculate like how much damage you're doing to enemies and stuff like that. I don't actually use those because I find that they clutter the videos up and stuff like that, and you know, I'm all about like the quality over stuff like that, because it doesn't really matter. I mean, Trove's not really that complicated, come on. But either way, that's pretty much what you're gonna be focusing on. Again, for a ring, you're probably just gonna want to go for health, because that's all you can really go for, is either health or magic find, because anything else, there's not really that much of a point, honestly. And otherwise, that already covers the Fae Trickster. Like I said, some of these classes we are not going to talk about as long as some of the others, especially as we kind of gain momentum and have already talked about some of the basic features that you're going to take across all the classes. Up next is the Draconis, or the Dracolyte as the game calls it. I've been calling it Draconis for a million years. Look up the Reptilian and you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, this is my favorite class in the game. He's absolutely beautiful, and I love this costume, if I do say so myself, that I actually modded into the game. It's not a part of the game. I just want to point that out, because lots of people always ask, dude, where'd you get that costume? And it's like, I made it. So anyway, the Draconis, I know a couple different builds for him that I will actually talk about, but again, because of this guy being an older class and all the dungeons getting buffed up and up and up, the Draconis is actually finally one of the more useless classes. Even though he's beautiful and I still love him, he is still my favorite class, he's not very good in U6, at least compared to some of the other classes. I guess that would be the real point to get across. So again, you're just going to be using the double magic emblem and the Sure Strike emblem, and then you're going to be wanting to use the Valorous Vial, which has a chance to recover a flask when you deal a critical hit, because this guy has just constant DPS. Now, this is one of the few classes where you don't actually need to focus on magic, like attack speed or anything like that, because his attack is already at a set speed and you don't really gotta worry about it. Now, of course, for an ally, you're gonna want to get yourself Samantha or the cheaper Prowling Shadow, which is another mount from the Treasure Isles, or ally from the Treasure Isles. This beautiful cat right up there, which gives you movement speed and 2.2% health each time you damage an enemy. Samantha is the exact same thing, but instead gives you 3 jump and the joke stat Superstition. Now, I find jump to be a lot more useful than movement speed, because movement speed is already covered by your mount, so you don't really need it. Now, as for the gear, as you can see right here, we're rocking full Radiant. This was my Draconis gear. However, I swapped it over to having attack speed so that I could use it for the Chloromancer, another one of my top favorite classes. But anyway, you're going to want to go for health regen, or more ideally, I would say a Shadow for like just health percentage or just maximum health would probably be a bit better than health regen, just because of the amount of health that you're going to be stealing from all these enemies. I don't know if this is going to work out because, yeah, well, anyways, he died way too quick. But again, it's all about that lifesteal. You actually can use some of the emblems that give you vampiric, and then you're gonna end up being like even stronger as this guy, seriously. But another thing too that I found you can do with him is if you go to the Elysian Bandolier, and this does work for other classes, experimentation is key to finding a way that you want to play the classes, because that's the real important thing. But I just use the Bandolier, and then instead of using the Sure Strike, which I guess I should be using that over... Well, this one doubles your magic damage, which I think is a bit more like that adds up to a bit more than your crit. I would have to experiment a little bit more with that, but I'm not exactly sure. But you can use a chromatic emblem, which reduces the cooldown of all your abilities every time you use a flask. So one of the things that I used to do with the Draconis is you go into your ultimate, and then you notice our cooldown right at the bottom middle. But if you start drinking the flasks, right about there, it takes about 3 or 4 flasks per, and then by the time he de-dragons, you can actually just go into dragon mode all over again and start damaging enemies. Now, unfortunately, this means that you're going to be spending a bit of your time drinking flasks and waiting for the animation to end, meaning that it's not like as ideal as just using Arcane and Sure Strike and all of that stuff. Plus, you're gonna go through your vials like crazy, as opposed to the Valorous vial where you're actually gonna be regenning them. But that pretty much covers the Draconis. I'm the Neon Ninja, and he actually is a very fun, very awesome class, albeit a little bit weak. He's always been a kind of weak class. Lots of people like to think that Trove is, I'm just gonna say this here just to kind of demyth what's been going on with a lot of people, is lots of people like to act like this game is very, very complicated because, I don't know, I guess they're trying to like feel like they're good at a video game or something like that. But honestly, the biggest reason that I love this game is it's so easy. Like, seriously, there's nothing complicated about it because all the numbers that go into all the classes and stuff isn't very complicated. So the point that I'm trying to make is lots of people like to think that the Neon Ninja is a techie class, but he's not. He's actually always been kind of a weaker class. The only way that you can actually make him kind of worthwhile is if you end up going for, I just swapped over all my night gear, is if you end up going for attack speed with this guy, because if you experiment with attack speed, then this guy ends up attacking like so fast because his basic attack speed is already, like, as you can see, pretty good. I do want to point out too that max attack speed is 200. I don't think you can get any more than that. I don't have any melee attack speed gear or anything like that though. But again, Sure Strike emblem, Martial emblem, and then you can actually use the Valorous vial while you have the attack speed because you're attacking things super duper fast, right? So you're gonna be regenning like equally fast. Now, of course, the ally is definitely gonna be the Raptor Berserker because that chance for the health, but mostly the oh, it just says movement speed, but I thought it gives, I think it gives attack speed too, unless I'm mixing that up with another stat. I could be wrong about that. But honestly, there's not really that much to say about the Neon Ninja, other than I guess you could say that his dash ability is number 1, which kind of tangles enemies up, is actually very, very useful when playing with other players. While you're playing on your own, it's kind of, it's okay. It's not like it's bad or anything like that. But as far as your attack speed, which is very good, most of this guy's damage actually comes from his right click, which makes him invisible, and then depending on how many enemies you ended up hurting, you'll actually throw a couple shurikens, and that is where this guy gets his damage. If you end up doing that over and over again, and I'm sure with the crit strike, he could actually be fairly powerful. I should say playable rather than powerful, because I know that even if you go into U6 with this guy, you're not really gonna survive as good as the other classes. But I do want to take the chance to just kind of point out that it's not that you can't play in U6 with all these other classes. You definitely can, but the game is so unbalanced that playing as the more recent classes just makes the most sense because they're so much more powerful than all the starter classes. Now it's time for Gutsman, the Candy Barbarian, or somebody actually said this guy kind of looks like Homer Simpson, so that was pretty funny when I saw that comment. Anyway, for the Candy Barb, he actually used to be one of the tanky other strong classes that was actually right on par with the Draconis. The Draconis had more DPS, while the Candy Barb had more survivability because of the amount of maximum health that you're going to be going for, because that's pretty much the stat you're going to be going for with this guy is your maximum health. because attack speed, although it could be okay, this guy's normal attacks are fairly slow, as you can see, and most of his abilities are just based on the fact that they have chances of healing him and stuff like that, so it makes him very survivable. If that is even a word. But otherwise, of course, Raptor Berserker, as always, and trying to get all your health up as much as you can. Attack speed would end up being okay, because as you saw right there, we did end up getting the boost from our Raptor Berserker, which gave us more attack speed. Also, there is a chance of getting more attack speed with his normal ability, unless I'm actually just mixing that up and you only get attack speed from the Candy Barb's abilities. Again, like I said earlier in the video, I never really mained as all these classes, so honestly, I'm not 100% sure on how to get the absolute best for a Candy Barb. I just kind of have a general consensus for it. Now, one thing I do want to point out about this guy is his jump attack right there. Don't even bother using it. It's really fun for like jumping into the middle of battle and stuff like that, but because Trove is not a complicated game, it doesn't actually take like aggro or anything cool like that. And the attack of it is actually just bordering on useless, because your basic attack is already going to cover as much, if not more damage than the leap attack would anyways. And your right click attack is pretty much the big one that you're going to be reliant upon. So you can also, I guess, go for an energy regen build, but I wouldn't really recommend it. You can go for the vampiric vial, which ends up, you know, healing your guy, healing your, flasks as you kill enemies, because that kind of happens a little bit more often than the Valorous Vial, where you're gonna be, you know, tagging all sorts of enemies and stuff like that. But maybe it would be more recommended to use the Valorous, just because of how many times you can do the spin attack, which actually covers quite a bit of area, depending on the dungeons that you're in. So if there's tons of enemies and stuff, maybe it'll work better. But otherwise, with this class, I would honestly say to experiment with it. And if you're just starting out in Trove, I would not recommend this guy as a first class, because although he's actually a lot of fun once you end up getting him powered up, because he's very beefy, as a starter class, he is extremely boring, especially compared to some of the other classes, only because I'm not saying he can't be your favorite. I'm just saying that as you're starting this game out, his attack speed being super slow, I remember when I first got this guy, it was kind of like, ugh, give me a faster character, especially if you come from the Neon Ninja. And now it is time for Ice Sage to show you his power. Get out of here, you little worm freak. Leave me alone, I'm busy. Trying to do stuff, you jerk. So the Ice Sage, I'm just gonna say this right here, right now, is unfortunately one of the most boring classes, at least to grind up, and technically he's kind of one of the most useless classes outside of grinding like Daughter of the Moon and stuff like that, just because of the, like, he's got very slow default movement speed, and even his attacks are not necessarily that fast. But he's gonna be a mage class that you're gonna want to go for the cooldown, because you don't need the movement speed buff or anything like that, and you're kind of reliant on your ultimate, because that's really the only thing that actually has like a hardcore cooldown. The ultimate, of course, if you don't already know, freezes all the enemies in the area. However, he can become more of an annoyance rather than a tactful character, because unfortunately, as the enemies remain frozen, they cannot have their death animation occur until after the frozen ability has worn out. So in lots of cases, like in U6 and stuff like that, where everybody is like super duper powerful and already kind of knows what they're doing and has all their gear, lots of people will come in, freeze everything as the Ice Sage, and that actually is going to take like 5 to 10 seconds extra for the enemy to die that already would have died in like 2 seconds, and it becomes a little bit annoying for grinding and stuff like that. Now anyway, as per gear, you're just going to want to be focusing on attack speed. The gear that we have right now is actually optimal for him, only because he's pretty much the exact same as, like, you can pretty much use all the same gear on the Ice Sage and the Chloromancer, so you're gonna focus on attack speed, and you're gonna be focusing on crit damage, not so much on health or regen or anything like that, because this barrier that surrounds your character actually already is very powerful, which any damaging attacks that would do more than 10% of the Ice Sage's maximum health is absorbed, but it ends up breaking the shield. So you pretty much end up casting this shield like almost all the time. I mean, I guess if you ended up having more health, maybe it wouldn't like despawn as much. Oh, excuse me, frog in my throat, or something like that, but I'm not exactly sure. Now, I do want to point out, though, that the Ice Sage secretly is actually quite powerful. mostly with his right-click attack combined with the Sure Strike. Other than that, not necessarily that strong. Again, to reiterate the point that I said earlier, if his attacks would phase through enemies, then he would just be invincibly awesome, because his basic attacks will actually slow down enemy movement, similar to Diablo and stuff like that. But unfortunately, they're only single target. So you can only slow down like one enemy at a time. That's why this guy is more ideal for fighting with groups in a Shadow Tower. And even then, you only really need one Ice Sage. You're not gonna want to focus that much on getting like a whole group of Ice Sages. But because of this guy's shield, he does have survivor ability. It's just that overall his balance doesn't really fit as well as some of the other classes. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Now it's time for the Shadow Hunter, which, other than his abilities being extremely buggy, would be, yeah, very powerful. Seriously, this guy is like pretty much the sniper of Trove, but unfortunately, most of his abilities don't even work, and the devs keep fixing his abilities in the patch notes and stuff like that, but they're mostly fixing his abilities so that he works in PvP. So he's actually really, really strong in PvP, but as for PvE, like fighting monsters and the environment and stuff like that, not so much, because half of the time his abilities don't end up working. Now, of course, I don't have anything for this guy, and I would not recommend getting yourself a Radiant Bow unless you're doing it last. Like, pretty much get a sword or a staff. Those are pretty much right on par with each other, or a spear. That can actually be a very good radiant weapon too. And then maybe go for a gun, and then finally go for the bow, because at the moment this guy is just not strong enough, mostly because his abilities always miss and they phase through things and stuff like that. Once he ends up getting like fixed properly, this guy's actually a lot of fun and could end up being quite powerful. Now, his basic attack, of course, is not necessarily that fast, and you're not really gonna want to focus that much on attack speed, because most of all you're going to be using your right click ability. So maybe I would say using energy regen would be a better stat to go for rather than something like that. But as you see right there, when the skull gets on an enemy, which is just his passive, it makes it so that the enemies end up taking a lot more damage, and his ultimate is that's the real cat's pajamas, which would end up making this guy super duper powerful, because it marks all the enemies in the area and gives you a radiant bow, which, I mean, it just wrecks everything. It's got some high damage on it, son. It really, really does. But unfortunately, the problem comes in because half of the time you'll end up having a huge group of enemies and you'll shoot your radiant bow and then suddenly it kills everything except for the boss. I don't really know why it does that, but it does. Raptor Berserker, and then I guess you could go for attack speed or something. As you can see, I only have a Shadow 2 bow. I don't really have anything on this guy, which is unfortunate because honestly, Shadow Hunter's one of my favorites, man. Like, I love this class. I remember when he came out, he is so fun to play. Like, he really is, because he's the only class that actually kind of plays as his own type of playstyle, you know? So it's like, even with the sniping and stuff, besides like lag, which is a huge issue with Trove. Hopefully they're going to be resolving that in this new year, because they've talked about it extensively. But I'm just going to say straight up, I really hope that they end up buffing up the Shadow Hunter and fixing most of his broken problems and stuff like that. And then I might actually try and hunt for a set of Radiant gear, because grinding as the Lunar Lancer, I will just say, in case you haven't watched the video, Lunar Lancer is pretty much the strongest for farming in the entire game, but he gets old really fast, and I just think it would be a lot of fun to be grinding in U6 with the Shadow Hunter, so long as he would end up working properly. Now we're on to the Pirate Captain, who surprisingly is actually one of the more powerful classes of the game if you can get your hands on a full set of Radiant, which I do not have because I'm still just using the same Shadow 3 gun, and I don't have a good hat or anything like that. Now this guy ends up becoming very, very powerful so long as you're using the Sure Strike and everything like that, because you're very reliant on your little ally right there, and he actually, as he fights and as you're damaging enemies combined with him and stuff, he's actually gonna end up getting stronger and stronger. And I was gonna say I don't think he despawns, but he actually does, so maybe it's based on yourself and defeating enemies. Yes, actually it is, because you see he upgraded once. And as he ends up upgrading to his final form, he ends up being really, really powerful, and your ultimate's actually really good too. Now, your number 1 is not the ideal ability. However, it makes the pirate captain, like, not ideal as in it doesn't really cause that much damage and stuff like that, but it is single-handedly the ability that actually makes this guy invincible, especially later on when you have proper gear, because as you'll notice right here, we get aggro of the enemy, we throw our little TNT guy over there, and it immediately attracts the aggro of everything in the area. Now, if there's huge groups of enemies, that can become a bit of a problem, and as you can see right here, we actually don't have any energy, and it doesn't respawn until you end up defeating enemies, and then they drop doubloons, which recovers his energy. So energy regen is never a stat you need to actually focus on with this guy. I'm finding too that the prefect penguin seems to be the best for this guy, because the only other thing that you would use is the Chloromancer Cubesley, which cooldown is not really that much of an issue for this guy. I mean, unless you're trying to use his ultimate over and over. But again, this is not a class that I am particularly experienced in playing at the end game, because as you can see, I don't have end game gear for him, because it can end up being quite expensive, especially because not that many people are making their making themselves radiant guns and stuff like that. Your basic attack, you could, I guess, focus on attack speed, maybe, but I don't think it's recommended, because your basic attack actually isn't causing as much damage as your allies end up doing. So it's a little bit of a sticky situation, I would say, honestly. But otherwise, you can see pretty much all the same stuff. You're going to be using the Arcane Emblem, the Sure Strike. Probably end up using a better flask than the Elysian Bandolier. I just kind of use that because the last time I actually played on the Pirate Captain was like ages ago. So that's like, you're definitely gonna want to experiment a little bit, try to find something that works for yourself. If you end up having radiant gear though, he can actually end up becoming very, very powerful, especially in shadow arenas, because a lot of his his little tank guy actually has a little bit of AoE and stuff like that. And as you're killing things faster, it means that you're regenerating energy faster. So in huge groups of enemies, you can potentially have infinite energy so long as they're constantly dying. G'day, mates, I'm the Boomeranger. Blam! Destroy it, magic man! This guy is actually one of the best classes if you're gonna be using him for mining, because he's got his bomb that you can use very, very tactically. Not a word, I just keep saying it though. But he's actually more ideal for digging and stuff like that, because his number 1 bomb can actually destroy quite a bit of the environment. And then so long as you end up catching your boomerang, he'll this guy works on a cooldown rather than having energy. So you're gonna notice that he actually starts with 0 energy, and he's never gonna have energy. That's some weird generation, unless, get out of here, unless you end up catching your boomerang, because it is all based on cooldown. Now this guy, he's a strong puppy. Like seriously, man, if you end up getting this guy proper radiant gear, he can be very, very powerful. And I do want to point out that this is one of the only classes in the game that can use 2 types of weapons. He can use a bow and arrow, so pretty much him and the Shadow Hunter are the only classes that use a bow. This guy can be pretty strong with it, only because the ranged damage is okay, but honestly, you're gonna be getting up close and personal with most everything, so I wouldn't really recommend doing that for this guy. Now, as you can see, I only have the Radiant weapon, which I definitely need well, actually I have the jump on it because, like I said, I use this guy for mining, not so much for fighting. But if you end up having the proper gear, attack speed is definitely something you're gonna want to go for, because his basic attack speed is extremely slow, especially just starting out. And then, of course, you're just gonna be wanting to go for as much damage as possible, because you don't really gotta worry that much about dying, especially because you can just use the death-defying vial. And when you boost up this guy's attack strength, he can actually become very, very powerful. He's actually a lot of fun to play as too, because he's got very fast basic movement speed. His roll is a lot of fun, and his abilities are a lot of fun too, even though most of them are just like throwing pots at enemies and stuff like that. But the point being that they can actually heal you out, cause lots of damage, and his boomerang can actually stun enemies while it's also reducing your cooldown. And ultimately, straight up, this guy can end up becoming very, very powerful. I've seen lots of people that don't have enough gear that they can make the spear classes stronger or anything like that, so they end up just using the Boomeranger. And let me tell you, this guy can handle U6 no problem. I'm the Necro. I'm in Tomb Raider. Get it? This is a Tomb Raider. He is beautiful. He is awesome. He is extremely powerful. Seriously, this guy is one of the top classes in the game. Not necessarily the top, but he's definitely one of them, mostly because his minions and especially Bowser, the gigantic skeleton. So the way that this guy kind of works, we'll just skim over, is for the most part, you can actually just give him your Draconis gear. So if you have Radiant gear for your Draconis, it is equally going to end up working on this guy. Now, as you're kind of damaging enemies and just kind of fighting and stuff as time passes, I should actually say, you're gonna notice the souls surrounding our character, which lets us throw down more skeletons. You can only throw down 6 at a time. 6 at a time? Really? Did they change that? Maybe they did. Yeah, it seems like 6 at a time, and otherwise the other one's despawning. Unless that's one, yeah, 6. Okay, so that ends up getting you the strongest Bowser. This guy is pretty much where all your damage is gonna come from, because your character itself mostly is focused on survivability. Like your basic attack, I think, has a little bit of life leech, and when you use your number 1 ability, it gives you even more life leech. And of course, it's based on how much energy you have. His energy regen is a stat that you can definitely go for, but yeah, it's okay. So you're gonna want to go for Sure Strike and the Arcane Emblem. You can, of course, go for a Vampiric Emblem, and that will make him even more invincible. And then the Valorous Vial. Now, the next emblem that you actually want to go for, rather than the Arcane one, is a very expensive one. Which one is it? I'm not exactly sure which one it's called. I know that I don't have it because it's actually very, very expensive. Increases laser man. Where is it? Maybe I skipped over it. Either way, it's the one that summons a temporary damage dealing ally. No. Damage back reflected. Okay, well, anyway, there's one of the emblems that you're actually going for. Oh, unless it's the vial. Ah, that's probably what it is, right? The Chaos Vial? Yeah, triggers a random extra emblem event while used. Nope, that's not it. Vanguard? First time you are damaged in combat. Has a chance to recover a charge when you complete a dungeon or lair. Has a chance to recover a charge. Sorry, everybody. I didn't really know which one it is. Anyway, you know what? Oh, there it is. The Vial of Unleashed Power. That is actually extremely ideal for this character if you can get your hands on it. However, it's a very expensive vial, and on average, not many people are selling it. Now, what this does is triggers your flask's healing effect and your emblems when your ultimate ability is used. And as far as I know, it actually doesn't take a flask count. So that means that, especially as a Tomb Raider, because Bowser right here is on an 8-second cooldown, that means pretty much every 8 seconds, you're gonna end up getting critical strike as well as your double damage, because that was a flash. That's right. So yeah, that actually makes this guy an extreme contender, especially because his little minions cause tons of damage. You're stealing lots of life, and I mean, seriously, it just makes him ideal. But otherwise, if you have Draconis gear, swap it over to this guy, because he is like just naturally more powerful than the Draconis himself. He's kind of like the Draconis 2.0, I guess, of Trove, at least until the Draconis has been buffed. Now we're on to the Doge. Or Doge. I know it's supposed to be Doge. I call it Doge because that's how it'd be said if it was Japanese. Anyway, Lunar Lancer time. This guy is the strongest class for farming dungeons. He seriously is. If you haven't already checked my my Flux farming tutorial video, I pretty much talk a little bit more in depth about his abilities, because otherwise for today, we're kind of just gonna skim over them. You're gonna notice I'm using Cotton Candy right there, which actually gives us bonus Magic Find, and I have a Shadow 4 ring that gives us physical and Magic Find, because Magic Find is pretty much what you're gonna want to focus on for this guy. You don't need attack speed for him because you're not actually going to be using his basic attack. You're going to be using his number 1 for days and days and days. So you're going to want energy regen on at least one piece of your equipment. You don't really need it on that much, because as you can see right here, I mean, we're getting a little bit of lag going on right now, but otherwise the dungeon already would have been complete, and we're talking in U6, so you don't really need to focus on that much energy regen. Of course, Martial Emblem, Sure Strike Emblem, and swap on over to the Death Defying Vial, because this guy is a glass cannon. He dies, he's very squishy. He dies super duper quick, so you're gonna notice that the Death Defying Vial is going to save you so many different times. Like, seriously, I would recommend getting the energy regen on your staff, and of course focusing on getting crit on everything, and sacrifice health anywhere you can. just because you don't really need it because he's gonna die anyway. Now it's time for Shovel Knight. Just kidding, it's the Revenant. This is a costume I made. Links in the description and stuff. Anyways, this guy, if you are a new player to Trove, and if you don't really have the most ideal possible gear to beef up any of the other classes, I'd say take Revenant, because he easily ends up soloing U6 without a problem. And we're talking like not even using the best gear possible, just because this guy is so strong and survives. Like he is the tank of Trove. Like seriously, he's got so much health. I mean, at least you can't want to go for so much health, which I'm noticing right now. I don't really have that much health on all my gear right here, unfortunately. So this is not ideal gear for the Revenant. However, like that's the thing, is you're gonna want to go for your maximum health, because that is what determines how strong his attacks are and stuff like that. And almost all of his attacks actually have a little bit of lifesteal to them. You can go for the build that I use for this guy is the Chronomatic Emblem and the Sure Strike, because what I find is, oh, and of course the Valorous Vial again, which is the one that gives you flasks as you deal critical damage. I find that this works really well for this guy. It's kind of spammy because you'll use your ultimate ability, right click, drink a potion, right click, drink a potion, and as you're drinking your potions and doing all this right click, you're causing mega damage and you are refreshing your cooldown on your ultimate ability. You see right there, we can cast it again. Now, the biggest reason this guy became useless for farming, at least compared to the Lancer, is because look how slow he is. But now you can press 2 again and you can actually deactivate his ultimate attack, which is fantastic and makes him very, very strong and very, very good for grinding in U6. However, I don't use him as much just because he still isn't as fast as the Lunar Lancer, as you can see with his basic movement speed and stuff like that. And all those things kind of do end up adding up. And I mean, I played as the Revenant like a lot, and he is seriously like one of my favorite classes. He's definitely an awesome dude, but still not really ideal for the kind of playstyle that I have. Now, again, you're gonna want to be going for as much health as possible, crit damage, physical damage, and you don't really need RNG regen. That's why our spear is not ideal for this guy, because this guy's abilities are based off of health drain. Like, you drain your health as you end up using his abilities and stuff. Now, lots of people always talk about using his #1 ability. Generally, I find it not to be that good, mostly because it gets stuck a lot. Sometimes you'll be hitting it, you'll let go, and he'll just keep doing it until he's dead, unless you like tap it like crazy and stuff like that. But I mean, generally, I don't find it to be that good, because you're mostly relying on his ultimate ability, and his shield bash actually causes more damage than his #1 ability. Now, again, you're gonna want to get your hands on Samantha or the Prowling Shadow to give this guy even more lifesteal. Again, too, if you don't want to go for that weird ultimate build or something like that, you can swap out the Chronomancer, maybe the Sure Strike, but I wouldn't recommend it. You can swap it out for the Vampiric Emblem if you find that you're still dying too quickly, because then you're just gonna be like super duper powerful. The only things that end up giving me trouble with the Revenant is like doing hard mode towers and stuff like that, because otherwise he can survive U6 no problem. Hey man, it's time for the Chloromancer. Last but not least, one of my absolute favorite classes, mostly because of his style. I love the way that this costume looks. I've said it 1,000 times, seriously, because it's pretty much like a Japanese emperor, and I'm all about like that culture and stuff like that. So it's absolutely awesome. However, his abilities are kind of useless. You can't find out very quick, but he is another class. Because he's the most recent class, he's very, very OP. Again, the rule of thumb, third time in a row, is to always focus on the most recent class, because they always end up, like the devs end up making them the strongest. Now, they have talked about, look at this guy rolling in on his roller skates. They have talked about in this year, like 2016, they're going to be focusing on buffing up all the old classes and stuff like that. Time will tell whether or not they actually end up re-establishing the numbers and making them all more worthwhile and stuff like that, because ultimately it always boils down to the most recent class is the strongest, because it ends up getting the most attention, and then they just move on to the next class and they don't really do anything with the old classes. So again, time will tell. Now, with this guy, of course, all of your abilities, you're gonna want to focus on attack speed, because the only thing you're gonna be using with this guy is his basic shot and his right click. And his right click flower ends up growing faster if you end up having faster shots, right? So this guy is not as ideal as the Lunar Lancer for hunting and stuff like that, only because 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. Now you're actually causing damage. So that's about 3 seconds or less for every single dungeon that you end up grinding, as opposed to the Lunar Lancer, who would have already cleared the dungeon in that 3-second time period. Now, don't get me wrong, Chloromancer is a lot of fun. He's a very, very powerful class, and again, you're mostly just going to be using his right-click ability, because his number 1, by the time this thing grows up, the dungeon's already done in U6. If you end up having like this Radiant gear that we're rocking right here, I just have health regen because that's just the only ring I have. However, it would probably be better to get him maybe something else. I don't know. Use a Prefect Penguin, use a Sure Strike, use the Arcane Emblem, and you're going to want to definitely use the Valorous Vial, because as you throw one of these things down, it's causing constant damage, and it's giving you vials like crazy. Like, this guy doesn't really run out of vials, especially because for the most part, like, you're gonna be keeping enemies at bay and killing them no problem anyways. One thing you are gonna want to be careful of with him is you don't want to end up putting 2 flowers beside each other, because unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunate, they probably did it on purpose. I don't know if they actually did, but even though we have 2 of those flowers right there, only one of them is going to be causing damage to an enemy. That is to say, these dudes are not stacking, because if they did, you could throw down 4 at a time, and whatever is around would be dead like in 2 seconds flat, seriously. So that's probably why they only have it so that one of them is damaging an enemy at a time. So what you're gonna want to do is pretty much just cast one, wait for it to be kind of low on its lifespan, and then just cast another one. You're, for the most part though, in U6 and stuff, if you have ideal gear, you're not really gonna want to worry about that. Again, this being a more recent class means that he's very, very easy to get powerful for going into U6 and stuff like that, as opposed to some of the older classes can end up being very powerful, like the Pirate Captain, for example, but it's very, very expensive and very difficult, because you end up needing pretty much the ideal gear for him to actually be more worthwhile than some of the other classes. That said, he still is not a contender against the Lunar Lancer or anything like that. None of them are. That's kind of the disappointing thing, is because the Lunar Lancer is still always going to be the strongest. Now, that pretty much covers everything, ladies and gentlemen, of all of the classes. I hope that I covered everything that you wanted to hear about, rather than just, you know, kind of talking about, like, when people ask me, like, what do you do for ideal gear and stuff like that, this is what I came up with. So I hope that it answered one of your questions, and I hope that you found the video helpful. If you did, I would very much appreciate if you would Hadouken the like button for me, share, favorite, and subscribe to join Team Pixel. Otherwise, we're gonna call it here for today. Sayonara and stay epic, everybody.